So I'm gonna say something that may trigger some of you. This is going to get spicy. This EU Mercosur deal might be good for Europe, or it might be terrible for all of us in Europe. And that is exactly why people are arguing about this. Because depending on who you ask, this is either a smart geopolitical move that helps Europe compete with China and America, or it is another example of farmers, rural communities, and smaller producers being thrown under the bus so big exporters can make more money.
Excellent.
And honestly, as an American living in Europe, I'm not going to sit here and tell Europeans what they should think. That would be ridiculous. Even though I'm American and we think we know everything and we think we know it better, this time I'm gonna pump the brakes on that.
What?
Imagine me walking into a room full of Polish farmers saying, actually guys, I read 3 articles, so let me explain your life to you. I'm sure that's gonna go well. And no, I won't do that because I like to be alive. So today, I want to do something different. I want to break down both sides, why some Europeans support this deal and why others are furious about it. Who benefits? Who might lose? And I want to ask you, is this a smart trade deal for Europe? Or is it those deals where the benefits only go to the few powerful sectors while ordinary people deal with the consequences? And so, let's get into this. Hadouken! The EU Mercosur deal is basically a massive trade agreement between the European Union and South American countries like Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay.
You son of a bitch.
The basic idea is simple. Europe gets better access to South American markets, and South America gets better access to the European markets. Tariffs go down, trade goes up, companies can sell more products, and consumers get more choices. And politicians get to stand in front of a camera and say, this is historic. This deal has been negotiated for around 25 years. It is one of the biggest trade deals the EU has ever pushed. The Commission says it will save EU firms more than $4 billion per year in duties and could increase EU annual exports by up to 50 billion euros by 2040. But here's where it gets complicated. Trade deals are never just about Europe wins or South America wins. That is too simple. Trade deals create winners and losers inside countries. One industry wins, and another industries get crushed. One region gets new opportunities, and another region gets anxiety. So the real question is, it's not just, is trade good? The real question is, who benefits from this specific trade deal? And who carries the risk? Hadouken! Now let's start with the argument in favor of the deal, because it's not stupid. People who support this deal are not sitting in a Brussels twirling their mustache like Bond. People who support this trade deal are not sitting in Brussels twirling their mustache like a Bond villain saying, how do we destroy the European farmers today? I mean, maybe. The pro-deal argument is actually pretty serious. Supporters say Europe needs to have new markets. Europe cannot just depend on the United States. Europe cannot just depend on China.
China?
And with the global trade becoming more unstable, the EU wants more partners, more supply chains, more options, and more influence. That's why countries like Germany and Spain support the deal. Reuters reports supporters argue it can help offer business loss because of US tariffs and reduce Europe's reliance on China, especially for critical materials. That is a big strategic argument. We need to be less dependent. We need more trading partners. We need access to raw materials. We need to compete globally. And honestly, that argument makes sense. Because if Europe sits there while China builds influence in Latin America and America becomes more protectionist, then Europe risks becoming the guy at the party, standing in the corner saying, remember when everyone cared what I thought?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
So let's talk about why farmers are angry. Hadouken! Because it's not just farmers being dramatic. European farmers already deal with high costs, strict rules, climate regulations, animal welfare standards, environmental standards, and a lot of paperwork.
Fuck.
And then this deal says, okay, now compete with agricultural imports from countries where the land is cheaper, labor is cheaper, production costs are lower, and regulation may not be the same. That is the core complaint. It's not just simply competition, it's unequal competition. European Parliament research has specifically noted concerns that the Mercosur producers have much lower land, labor, and capital costs, and that may not meet the same standards as the EU producers on environment, animal welfare, food safety, and sanitary measure. So for the farmer's point of view, this feels insane. Imagine you're a farmer in France, Poland, Ireland, or Spain. Your government tells you, you must follow strict environmental rules. You must meet EU food standards. You must absorb higher energy costs.
What?
And then the same political system says, by the way, we're opening up a new market to cheaper imports from South America. You can understand when farmers hear that and say, are you joking? That is frustration with being asked to follow one rule book while competing against someone who may be operating under another. This is so stupid, honestly. Holy shit. Now, to be fair, the supporters of the deal have a response. They say, the Commission says sensitive agricultural imports are capped. Mercosur beef gets a quota of 99,000 tons at a 7.5% duty, which the Commission says represents 1.5% of the total EU beef production.
I don't believe you.
Poultry gets a 180,000 ton duty-free quota, phased in over 5 years, which the Commission says represents 1.3% of the total EU poultry production. So the pro-deal side says, farmers are exaggerating. These quotas are limited. This is not the end of European agriculture. They also say, EU food safety rules still apply. The Commission says any products sold in the EU must comply with the EU consumer protection standards. And those standards do not change under this agreement. So the pro-deal side is basically saying, this is not farmers versus corporations. Some European farmers and food producers can win too. Well, let's hope so. But the question is, which farmers?
That's a great question.
A French wine export might benefit. An Italian cheese producer might benefit. A Spanish olive oil exporter may benefit. But does that help a Polish poultry farmer? Does that help an Irish beef farmer? Does that help a small French cattle farmer? And that is where the conflict is. Because European agriculture is not one thing. A luxury wine exporter and struggling cattle farmer are not living in the same economic reality. You would think this would make sense. Does this make sense? You would think it would make sense. Hadouken! Critics say the deal could increase pressure on the Amazon and other ecosystems by encouraging more agricultural production, especially beef, soy-linked land use. This is one of the biggest emotional arguments against the deal. You know, when you see these young people throwing red paint on priceless artwork, and maybe that's the emotion that they are talking about. Because the EU presents itself as a climate leader. Because the EU presents itself as a climate leader. Fantastic. Europe tells its own citizens, you need to accept climate policy. You need to accept regulations. You need to accept higher costs for the environment. And people look at the deal and say this, wait, so we regulate our farmers at home, but import from places where deforestation is a major concern. That feels hypocritical to a lot of people.
How dare you?
Now, supporters respond by saying the new deal includes sustainability commitments and the EU deforestation-free products rules will apply to imports. The Commission says that from the end of 2026, only deforestation-free products including soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, and rubber will be allowed into the EU markets, including under the Mercosur agreement.
Right.
Side note, but who's going to regulate that? Are we going to have people in South America just regulating everyone all the time? Hadouken! This is where supporters make their strongest point. They say Europe cannot afford to be passive. China is active in Latin America.
China?
The US is more unpredictable. I agree with that. Global supply chains are unstable. Critical minerals matter. Energy transitions matter. I mean, I don't know, maybe nuclear program for nuclear energy. I'm just saying, The European Parliamentary Research Service says EU objectives include reinforcing strategic cooperation, supporting rules-based trade, and securing supply chain resilience and access critical raw materials for green and digital transitions. That matters. Because this deal is not only about beef and cars, it's about Europe's place in the world. If Europe does not build partnerships in Latin America, someone else will. China will. Or the United States might, but they could just go in there and just bully. Or other global powers will. And then Europe will complain later it has no influence. That is why some people who believe opposing this deal is short-sighted. They say, fine, protect the farmers, but do not pretend Europe can survive by only trading with itself. That is the strongest pro-deal argument I have read. Europe needs options. Europe needs partners. Europe needs to act like a serious geopolitical power.
Hadouken!
But the anti-deal side has a strong response as well. They say, do not hide behind geopolitics to justify a bad economic trade-off. Because yes, Europe needs strategy, but a strategy that sacrifices certain sectors without proper protection creates resentment. That's fair. Honestly, that's a fair argument. And this is where the deal becomes politically dangerous. If farmers believe the EU cares more about German car exports than rural livelihoods, you create anger.
No shit.
And once people believe the EU is serving corporations more than the citizens, it becomes very hard to rebuild trust. Yeah, absolutely. That is the deeper issue. This is not just about Mercosur. It's about whether ordinary Europeans believe the EU works for them. Because when Brussels says the deal will increase the GDP, a farmer may respond, my bills are not paid by the GDP.
And that's a fact.
When economics say, the long-term gains will be positive, a small producer may say, that's nice, but I need to survive this year. And that is the political problem. Now here's a part I personally find interesting.
Hadouken!
A lot of people say, this deal is great because European car companies can sell more vehicles in South America. Okay, but let's think about that. If someone in Brazil or Argentina wants to buy a BMW, Mercedes, or Audi, or Volkswagen, they're probably already wealthy enough to buy one. Tariffs matter, yes. Prices matter, yes. But a regular working class person in Brazil is not waking up tomorrow saying, good news, honey, the EU Mercosur deal passed. We are finally getting that BMW. I hope if it's a Beamer, it's going to be like an M5. Because, you know.
Speed and power, that's the solution.
I would take an M3 as well too. But I digress. So maybe the deal helps margins. Maybe it helps market shares. Maybe it helps long-term positioning itself against Chinese car companies. But I would be careful with this idea that this suddenly creates some massive new wave of luxury car demand. This isn't a magic button that's going to save the EU's economy. It is a strategic trade deal with uneven benefits. And that is why people are fighting, protesting, and pissed off about it. So I want to ask you, do you think the Mercosur deal is a smart strategy? Is it necessary for Europe to compete with China and America? Or is this exactly why people are losing trust in the EU? I look forward to reading your comments. And that's going to be a spicy comment section indeed. So if you do find this content valuable, I do ask if you can please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And please also hit that hype button because I truly want to build a community here. I want to say thank you everyone for watching till the end. You are a true legend. And with that said, and without further ado, let's get into it.
You son of a bitch!